Welcome to Diary of a CIO. My name's Sam Ebrahim. I'm the Executive General Manager, New South Wales for TrueCo, a national recruitment business. With me today, I've got Angela Coble. Very special guest today because Angela, I think I've shared this with her before, was the inspiration behind this podcast. I said to you before in previous episodes, the reason for this podcast is really to understand the story behind the title. So I think a lot of content online around technology transformations and agile and native versus mobile. The Women in Technology Leadership event that I ran in 2023, Angela was one of the first mentors in the program. And I remember sitting in the audience and listening to you talk about your background and your experience and where you came from to where you are today. And it's probably the first time I'd heard a senior C-level executive talk about, I suppose, the path they took and the story behind how they got to where they're today, being vulnerable and being open. And for me, that was a very humbling experience. It was something that I suppose, took stock on, walked away from, and I found it very motivating. And I looked at the audience and seen how captivated they were. So for me, that was the moment I thought, what can I do to bring more stories to people in New South Wales and across Australia from C-level executives like yourself. So thank you, Angela, for being my guest today, but also being the inspiration behind this podcast. I think for the listeners today, just a brief intro to start off with in terms of your background, where you started and where you've come to today would be really appreciated.
Wow, not to put the pressure on, Sam. So I guess my background's really eclectic. I was very fortunate at an early age to diverge from what I thought was going to be my path. I mean, you've heard this story many times, but I was intending to be a lawyer. So I'd gone through high school ready to become a lawyer and then decided I'd take a gap year. That gap year turned into pretty well 5 to 10 years worth of experiencing life. And the experiencing life then led me to agriculture because I grew up in a farming community. So agriculture was next best thing to where I was as opposed to being a lawyer. I don't know if I can draw the parallels between the two, but in any case, went into agriculture and then decided probably it was nice to buy a house and have children. So that really diverged my career. At that point, I went into finance and banking. And then I moved across to energy and utilities. And then I decided healthcare might be a really nice place to be. Then I thought, professional services, let's give that a go. And then I went, you know what, time to come back into government. And that's where I am now. So it's been quite an eclectic journey. And I think for me, the tenets as I've gone through that process, it's been about natural curiosity and just really having a purpose-led decision every single time.
Yeah.
So every choice I made was quite intentional, but it was led by that curiosity in the first instance. So I've been really fortunate to have a zigzag career. It's been great.
I think zigzag career is something I've definitely heard you talk about before.
Yeah.
What about, I suppose you talked about the industries, what about the role types? Was there any common theme within the role types, or was it industry agnostic and also role type agnostic? What did the role type look like for you?
Yeah, so it actually, I reflected on this for those that may know me well, for those that are getting to know me. I do a bit of a sense check on my own development every 12 months. So I'm kind of looking at what did I learn, what did I give back, and where might I like to go next? So obviously, quite intentional. And so that led to a lot of different opportunities and choices. So the curiosity would often lead me there first. So for example, agriculture was kind of straight out of high school, inception, administration. Probably one of my most significant leadership impact points, and I was the lowest in the organisation. So I was, 18 years old, sitting on the front desk as reception in an agricultural industry. And at that point, I made a decision to actually have the loudest voice and make the most change. And we can talk about that as we go through this process. But that was probably one of the most fundamental leadership roles that I ever took. And it was from behind the scenes that I actually did that. So it wasn't as a managing director or as a CEO. It was literally as the inception point. I kind of went through that. And interestingly, if you were to check my CV, every 2 years I'd make a different choice. So it wasn't about changing industries. It was actually about, again, I must have the attention span of a gnat. So my curiosity would lead me to look at something else.
Yep.
And it was never about being unhappy where I was. It was actually about, well, what can I learn next? What can I contribute to next? Because the more knowledge you have and the more learnings you have, the more impact and influence you can create. And so for me, that was an important part of my journey about that give back and that purpose-led moment. And so I kind of went through the ranks in agriculture, ended up, and I'm going to date myself now, but ended up doing Y2K as head of their administration of their tech. I still had done no qualifications at this point. I was literally just flowing through the organisation. I left there and went into finance, and I went into finance and banking. Again, I started on the front counter. So I kind of walked in the shoes of the front line roles before then coming into positions where I could actually make a significant difference on the organisation. So that one, again, I was in front roles, and then I actually went into CRM, so I was leading relationships. I was always customer focused, so it was about that piece. And then again, ended up really leading a tech transformation, still with no qualifications. And it was actually, that was quite a critical time in my career because a very loud CEO pulled me aside at that point because he got wind that I was going to go off and do a couple of little nighttime courses, because by that time I had 2 children.
Yep.
And I was trying to fit everything in, and I thought, yeah, I could probably do a couple of nighttime courses. And he got wind of it, and I swear it was the most terrifying experience in my life, because at that point, 27-year-old, I literally got summoned to the CEO's office. And I've walked down this very long hallway, which felt like I was traipsing to the final days of my career in finance. And he was waiting at the door. And I'm thinking, oh, I've given away $1 million or something. I've done something terrible. And actually, when I stepped through the door, on his desk were all these university applications. And he basically said, I don't care which university you choose, nor which course you choose, but you are not wasting your talent on bit by bit education. You are actually going to take these to Chief Operating Officer, and he's going to help you select the right course for where you might like to go. And so that kind of gave me a kick in the tail to start university. And I left that organisation basically as a Chief Operating Officer. So I got to that point after doing marketing and advertising and PR, and it was a wonderful experience. And then went into kind of into that energy sector, and again was in the field force, so 4,000 workforce doing poles and wires. So I went out in the field by choice at that time and got my white card, it was called at the time, to actually stand poles and sling conductor with basically the field teams. So
Wow.
Again, walked in their shoes. And that went through like manager of operations, so it was operations again, and then I went into business performance, and then I ended up doing a transformation and planning role, which has some really funny stories unto itself. Left there, curious again, and went into healthcare as records and information management. The least sexiest role that you could ever talk about. I'm going into records, so you're the librarian? No. I'm actually looking after records and information management. That then went records information management into cybersecurity as a conscious choice, decided it was time to do some practitioner tech qualifications, became a certified information security manager, which morphed into cyber, and then ended up being the CISO, then being their CIO, and then being their executive director on the board with responsibility of the full transformation, as well as being their CIO. So it was very, very
So
eclectic.
a true zigzag journey there.
So all types of roles in all organisations.
I think I've had guests on the show before that have definitely come from non-technical backgrounds. For example, Sheridan's come from a journalist background and moved into technology as well. A lot of people they feel that their pathway to where they want to go is very defined, and the next step for them is already laid out. It's their job to achieve the goals to get to that next step.
Yeah.
You have a very different mindset. How do you go, thinking what you talked about before, being the entry level, like front desk, how do you open those opportunities to you? How do you, I suppose, get the attention of the people in the business to acknowledge that Angela's got great potential and it's wasted where she is? How do you do that? Because that seems a rarity in the current landscape.
Yeah, I don't think there's any one prescribed method. I think for myself, again, I just keep coming back to this natural curiosity. So where I may have had capacity, I would lean in and help somebody else. And it was always leaning in and helping somebody else in a different area of the business. So I was absorbing that lived experience while still delivering where I was. I've kind of got this approach, which is a 50-30 kind of 20 rule, and it seems to apply in most cases, but certainly when it comes to transforming self or an organization, if you think about 50% of your time is spent running the business, so you're in the role that you're actually in, 30% should be looking, where is this role going? What else do I need to pick up along the way to help guide this role to its next step? And then that 20% is developing of self to actually make sure that you land that evolved role. So I think for me, it's always been about the peripheral and the edge experience that I could add on to where I was. So it wasn't about taking this huge leap and just completely throwing away what I'd learned or the path that I was on. It was about just kind of doing this little side step, this peripheral move, which allowed me to pull in some more expertise, which then led to that next experience. And then again, I'd do a peripheral experience, which would lead me to the next spot. So it was always that edge experience that I was looking to gather and leverage the learned experience and the knowledge I had already accumulated along the way.
How challenging do you find it? You talked around government and financial services and healthcare, very different industries, different types of businesses, different stakeholders. How do you adapt to what's needed in a different environment?
I think as you assess the roles and where you're actually at, situational leadership is actually quite critical. It fundamentally doesn't change your purpose and who you are and your intent of being there. But I think you get, and I've always been really, really fortunate, I could read a room really quickly. I could understand the situation that I was stepping into. And so in most cases, it's meeting the audience or the team where they are and then pulling them through. So it's being actually self-aware in yourself of, I need to meet you there, and then helping bring them on that journey. So I've never had to change my approach so much as just be really aware of each other person's journey and where they're at, and then meet them there first and then pull them through. So it didn't matter then if it was, what industry, it was all pretty agnostic because it was all about behavioural science and the person as opposed to the company and the role.
What about the culture of the businesses you've worked in? I think you talked around spending time doing your role, but then reaching out to other areas outside of your business unit to support as well. Organizations that I speak to very much are well-defined roles and wouldn't say in your box, but you're focused on a particular area. How do you navigate that into making sure that you're in the right business with the right culture that promotes that style of approach that you talk about?
Yeah, I think early in career experience, and I kind of have this approach that is around the 180 role model. So you look at something and you go in the opposite direction. So when you get a terrible leader, let's just say, you look at that person and you go, I'm going to go 180 because that's not the role model that I want. I'm going elsewhere. And I think it's the same with culture. So you get a good sense. You should be interviewing the company that you're going into with the mindset that you're going to grow and learn in there, but you're also going to help them achieve something that they couldn't do without you. Like your contribution is going to make a difference. And so I would always check culturally that this was going to be a good fit. So every time I've stepped into it, I've interviewed them as much as they've interviewed me. And that actually started, so the very first one, I didn't get the chance to interview. I straight out of high school, what did I know? I was just taking my first job to pay my mortgage pretty well. And I had no idea about what I was stepping into. So the learnings I got from that, all like horrible adverse learnings in those first few years, shaped the decisions I would make, the questions I would ask, and the cultures I would seek that would support the way that I would want to learn and contribute, but then also how I could then do that. So I have never been placed in a box. And funnily enough, a couple of times people have tried to place me in a box. And there's a really funny story when I was at banking. I was leading PR and advertising. And so I was in my corporate gear, and the customer had only ever seen corporate Ange in that environment because they'd never seen me out of it in my home environment, which was on a farm. And so we've gone to do this filming at this farm because that was the program we were doing. And the farmer, who I knew well but not well enough, he knew that I'd grown up in the country, but he kind of was thinking I grew up in the country in the town of the country. No. he actually had to bring his quad runner from one spot to the other, and he was trying to work out how he could do the quad runner, get the motorbike, get everything, get the equipment there. And I said, well, how about I just jump on the quad runner and I take it down for you? And he looked at me like I had two heads. And he said, are you serious? I went, yes. So he had actually put me in a box just simply from where he'd seen me. So he had used my situation to put me in a box. So I think that's probably the funniest moment. The look on his face was priceless. I wish I had taken a photo. But outside of that, very rarely have I been put in a box. But I think I have probably this underlying anthropological study in me where I observe behaviour and I observe human nature and I look at the environment. So putting me in a box is really difficult because I'm always looking and shaping what that could actually look like. So, yeah.
And when you talked around some of the, I suppose, earlier experiences in your career that defined what you look for in a good culture. So people listen to this podcast, I think, going through an interview process where you might have 2 or 3 stages, hour, maybe an hour and a half per stage, which is them interviewing you. But as you said, it's very much for them to be interviewing the organisation as well. What advice would you give to listeners who are looking for the right culture for them? What questions or what should they look for to make sure it's going to be the right culture for them?
There's little signals that you pick up on. And it's not, and it's often your gut will also tell you. So use your intuition is probably the first thing I would say. People dismiss that in corporate world, but actually it's a good litmus test for your own values and your ethics. So leverage that to start off with. But there's a few signals that can get sent. And I've got the best example when I went to one organisation. I'd gone through all these processes of interviews and it was feeling really good. But one of my criteria, which was born out of very early, family came first. Raising 2 beautiful humans was my way of contributing to society and making a real difference in that space. So I knew that they would come first. And so when I was moving into one of my most senior executive roles, I kind of went, well, I need to understand that the flexibility is a lived experience, not just written on paper.
Yeah.
And I was stepping into, at that point, it was kind of senior manager, just before that executive step. And I was being interviewed by the CFO for this particular role. And at the end of it, I was asking questions, which he absolutely welcomed. So I thought that was really good to start off with. He was relaxed in his body language. He was letting me ask questions. So I was getting the right signals there. And then at the end of it, and again, I'm dating myself, he pulled out his business card and he actually wrote his personal mobile phone number on the back. And he said, Ange, if there's anything else, this was a Thursday, he said, and it was in person. He said, if there's anything else that you need to ask, he said, I'm not coming in tomorrow. I'm going to watch my twins play soccer. Yeah. So I'm working from home in the morning and then their soccer game's around about 2:30. So he said, I'll be available on the mobile. I just won't be in the office. So he said, just give me a call if you've got any more questions. And I went, Very important signal. The CFO, which, in the most traditional sense of the word, are often the ones there 7 till 7. Like it's I don't know whether it's something that they learn from the start, but they're often the most pragmatic ones who are in the office. And here is this one, this is over almost 15 years ago now, saying to me, I'm working flexible. 15 years ago. So there's a signal. Straight away, that was a signal. So I think trust your instincts because it's your own moral compass at that point in time. Know that you're in an interview position that is equal to the person who's on the other side. Like they need you as much as you need them or you would not be in that situation. So give yourself some credibility of your self-worth for being there and then look for those minor signals that marry up with the kind of culture that you're actually looking for. So
okay, brilliant. Thank you.
Steps.
You talked around early in your career, obviously children are a big part of your life. How do you manage, I suppose, the balance between having children and working and then the higher education as well that you went through as well? As it seems a lot to be juggling. I'm sure there's lots of people listening to this podcast who are going through very similar situations and may not be struggling to find the right balance. So what advice would you give to them?
I think be a little bit kind to yourself too. You're never going to get the rhythm exactly right. But I think if you understand where your North Star is, everything's really easy to fit around. And North Star for me was always family. So I would hold firm family time. We had, around the table for dinner every single night. That was our family time. We always were sitting down together. So nothing intruded. Work or education would intrude in that particular time. But as the kids got older, so that I started my university kind of part-time at the age of 27. So I think Jay was like literally 12 months old. So that's my youngest one. And I would fit it in practically when they would go to bed. So I would actually have and they still remember this to this day. I had a double bed set up in my office where I would study. And so they would be in the bed and they'd be watching like mum study and they'd go off to sleep to my very loud tapping. I still remember that. But I think as I've gone through my career and my roles have gotten more intense, I've held firm to the rails. So I've actually created my own like swim lane that I would want to be in. So I'm, these are my boundaries. This is where I'm prepared to be. But I also flow through them. And you've heard me speak about flow a couple of times. But flow is a state which allows you to context switch and switch your mind without actually losing sight of that kind of North Star. So when you sit in a career and it's purpose-led, you're in flow already, because as you flow out of your career day, so your work day, you're flowing into maybe what that next thing is. And so for me, the next thing was, okay, if we did a normal 9 to 5 day, say, family time. And then I would flow into my learning time. And then I have to get 8 hours sleep. Like I do not operate well on lack of sleep, because when my mind's on, it's switched on and it needs that kind of downtime. So I always had this approach of flow, and I was always, maybe one day I would flow more into learning and I would flow less into a structured work day. And then the next time I would flow more into family, because that was, required on that particular day, and I would flow through the others. So this kind of sense of flow means you're being really sensible in your approach, but you're being kind to yourself, because you're not creating rigidness, but you're creating some level of boundary that you can flow through and context switch. And that's been probably the way that I've been able to manage it the best. And they've always kind of, that purpose-led career choice has fitted so seamlessly into my learning, because it's always lined up with the same purpose, that the only real prioritization was family. And that's not prioritization, that's the North Star. So that's it.
Talk about flow. Is that something that's natural to you? Is it something you had to train yourself to appreciate and understand how that works for you? How would people listen to this podcast and love the sound of that, but not sure how to approach
how to do it?
What advice would you give to them?
Start with clear context switching. Now, when I say context switching, it's giving yourself, so I'll do a normal day for me, say 5 o'clock until 8 o'clock is my time. That's it. I'll be up. I'll be strategically getting into my day, whatever it looks like. I also have a pretty hard and fast rule, no meetings before 10 o'clock on a Monday. Okay. And everyone's kind of embracing that no matter where I go, because it allows you to start your day quite strategically. So for me, that flow starts from the moment I get up, and then I context switch. I go, okay, that's me, and now I'm me in work, and then I'm me on break time, and then I'm me in learning, because I read every day, and then I'm me at home, maybe having a glass of wine with my husband, and then I'm me before I go to sleep, and then the day starts again. So it's pretty... That flow is just a continuous process. And if you're starting very first, as I said, just create some context points. Okay, I'm going to switch from here. Because if you're like me, my brain doesn't switch off. I have to actually help it. And so I had to put those context switching moments in so that it got used to me switching gears as curiosity would take on something else. And that then over time formed this kind of flow pattern as I went through. So I think if you're just starting out, just context switching, really, really easy way to start building that flow into your day.
Okay. You talked a lot about curiosity, purpose. Self-development is obviously really important to you. How do you decide where you are now, the skill sets you've got now? How do you look at what's next from you from a self-development perspective, or how do you identify what's next for you that's kind of, I suppose, help you achieve what you want to do next?
Yeah, I was always learning something. On reflection. So even when I left high school and went into that first unassumed position, like I had no real sense of what I was stepping into, I did accounting in the first year, and then I did workplace and safety. So I was always flowing through some type of learning. And initially it was very role-based. So I was looking at what did I need in my current role to have trust and credibility in the conversations that I would like to have. But then as I kind of got out of that first career stage, so say, around about that late 20s point where I got that kick in the tail from the CEO to go off and do an academic level study, that actually helped start to cement some of those changes that I was kind of embracing through the way. And I think the being able to look far enough ahead and say, this is the direction, has actually been a natural approach. Like I can't switch off looking ahead. So I'll look ahead and then bring it back to now. What do I need to be doing right now? So even while I was doing academia part-time, I was doing practitioner level in my roles. So I did training and assessor Cert 4. I did records keeping Cert 4. I did, customer relations certs. So I was going through gaining practitioner level qualifications to be relevant in my role at the same time as then looking forward and going, hey, cyber's going to be pretty big, I think. Yeah. Maybe I should do that now. Or leadership's going to be a quality and a skill that people are going to really, really need because a lot of the lower level tasks are going to be automated. So let me do 25 years worth of leadership study and just see how that ebbs and flows. So I think I've been fortunate to be one of those people who could look ahead and bring it back to now. But if you're not naturally like that, look in your role right now and look at the 2 or 3 people that might have been in the role before you and see where they've gone and see what practitioner level qualifications they achieved maybe in role. And if they didn't achieve any practitioner level skills in role, are they really on the same path as you? So you've got some questions to ask at that point. Yeah.
I find as someone who I'm self-development and getting outside my comfort zone, I seek that out. And I find it's infectious that when I'm around other people, I want them to do the same as well. Do you find self-development is infectious when you're around other people, you want them to be on the same journey as you?
I think it's more about encouragement. So I've found. So I am very, very focused on career development and self-development. And so, for example, as I'm setting up a new team, the first conversation is not about what are you going to do in the role. First conversation is what are you trying to achieve in yourself from this role? What is your longer term career aspiration and what would you like to develop so that I can orchestrate from the very first day, making sure you get that learning as you go through this process. So it becomes a lived experience in the role. So the person doesn't actually have to seek it out. I'm helping to orchestrate from that very first conversation. And then if there's a practitioner level qualification required, we can have that conversation because that does, whilst I would carve out time during the day, and most people would if it's an in-role qualification, if it's something that requires a commitment outside, that's a family construct decision or it's your own personal choice. So if I can give some development in the workplace environment, well, then I'm contributing to that person's community in a different way. So I'm freeing them up from having to do it in their own time. And so I've always had that mentality, what can I help orchestrate in role that provides them with that development? And that was from a very early age. I had some really great leaders that would actually be able to look far enough ahead for me, obviously that first CEO, and then get me on that path. And what I chose to do with that path was then entirely up to me, but it was actually the encouragement to go that way. And so what I've learned is that I can see where that role maybe will go or where that person may like to end up. And so it's up to me to help orchestrate some of those development opportunities for that person then. What they choose to do with that is then entirely up to them, but at least I'm giving them the opportunity of choice.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I think one of where we met was a Women in Leadership event. And I know you're a huge advocate for driving diversity, not only in tech, but across the board as well. Can you share, I think, some of the opportunities you've taken up, particularly with the UN and other organizations in terms of driving that diversity?
Yeah, so it's one of those things you can't just choose to want to be a gender advocate or a women in leadership advocate. There has to be some drive behind it. Otherwise, you're doing it. It's not purposeful. You're just doing it to tick boxes or increase visibility or the like. So for me, it was really about what contribution am I going to make? And I think you and I have spoken about before. I knew pretty early on I was not going to go into politics.
Yep.
So I was not going to be able to affect social change through government policy or that particular place. So I knew workplaces was going to be the space where I could affect and influence a better outcome. So it's kind of one of those stories where you're bringing people through a journey. What kind of leader would you hope to work for yourself? And then what kind of leaders would you like to develop to maybe for your children to report to? So you're kind of creating the society construct through the workplace. So when you bring the trifecta together, so you've got the workplace, society and advocacy, I thought, I'm not going to really be in a position to be the Prime Minister, so I won't affect social change there.
Yep.
But I'm going to spend a lot of time in the workplace, and how can I make that better, and how can I help influence societal outcomes through that process? So women in leadership, obviously, that 180 role model moment for me was a female leader. So I looked at that person and thought, you should be my role model, but you're not. You're my antichrist of a role model. I'm going in the opposite direction. I actually want to help develop a different narrative, because that could have absolutely crushed me as a 18-year-old, seeing that as, well, that's what a female leader looks like. And I was working in a full female environment as well. So I stepped back and went, well, I can actually have a voice and I can make a difference in this space. And as I go through my career, I need to be pulling people along with me, and I also need to be pushing. So I need to be pushing those that might be in a more senior area of influence to say, these are important lessons that we need to learn along the way. How can we help? It actually drove my own research too. So I was very focused on that gender equality piece when it came to technology leadership. And I need to unpack the pathway when I was doing that. And the pathway for women and men in the research that I'd done is identical, but the lived experience is almost polar opposite. And so unless you're able to help educate and advocate for that, then why am I?
What did your research show in terms of the polar opposite differences?
It was just one, for example, is the narrative that's used to explain the career pathway. So early in career, there's the men's or the boys' club conversation. I could only hope that my daughter has a girls' club, because in the positive sense of the word, it's consciousness raising and it's actually support network. And so while some groups are exclusive, the fundamental requirement of that club is to wrap resources and support around a person to help them navigate life and career. I would hope that my son has a boys' club that helps do that, because that's a network of support that they need to get through that. Unfortunately, it's been, for a few bad experiences, it's been deemed as a negative. And so therefore, immediately it becomes a learned behaviour for a early in career female stepping in to go, the boys' club is bad. It will actually hold me back. Actually, let's counteract that. The girls' club is great. Let's build our own and let's leverage that force of nature as we go through. So there's one example. The negative narrative used to explain an event in a career for women is very, very different to the positive that it's used for men. Growth mindset's another one.
Yep.
That horrible term that I dread calling out, the imposter syndrome, is just growth mindset. But it was used as a negative barrier, and it becomes a learned behaviour for women versus it's actually growth mindset in men. And we hope to create uncomfortable experiences because then we grow and learn.
Yeah.
So I think for me, that was an interesting area. And so when I looked at the influence I could have, so even before I stepped into the doctoral research on that topic, I knew that by bringing advocacy into the workplace, so for example, UN Women Australia, by bringing that kind of brand, that absolute purpose into the workplace to shape an experience inside the workplace was only going to benefit society on the whole, because it's not just about the women's experience. That lived experience is great, but then it's about how as a community do we put support behind all of this. And here is one amazing advocacy group that can help us understand it a little bit better.
Yeah.
And so that's how I brought those elements into the workplace. And that's how I ended up doing the research as well.
Yeah, and I think I've spoken to a number of people in my network that you support outside of the work as well. And I think the impact you've had has been impressive. And I think even the the events that I ran in 23 and 2024, your contribution was very well received. So I think it does take time, but I think the impact is already seen. Talking about, I suppose, change. So you're someone who's a big advocate for change, not only in technology, but kind of across the board. So how do you approach change, and how do you bring people on that change journey?
I think change for good is the way it really needs to be framed, because you can disrupt and really set an organization back many, many years. You can disrupt and change a role and set that person back many, many years. So I think for me, never underestimate the power of calm when it comes to change. So you can often see the disruption that it's going to cause. People will have the usual behavioural response. They'll either embrace it or they'll run from it. So the fear factor will either come forward or the excitement will come forward. Hey, this is new and exciting. I'm really looking forward to getting on this. I don't know what it looks like, but I trust that you're going to actually help me get on this journey and this is going to be great. I cannot see I cannot see where we're going. I don't like this change piece. I really am fearful about what this is going to mean for me. I don't think I've got the capacity to actually get on board, and I don't understand why we're going there. So you've got these two kind of forces of nature at play. And depending on what type of change you're implementing, a person who could be energized by one could actually be detracted by the other. So I always try to understand the fundamental purpose of the change and then, again, meet the audience where they are. I had one example where I knew we had to create an untethered work environment. This was around about 2018 or so. And I needed to be able to help an organisation go on a particular change journey, which was not really tech-led, it was behavioural-led, because it was all about new skills and acquisition that I knew that they would need to have versus just the technology platforms that they would need to engage with. So I created kind of this mass trial environment, which I knew I could roll back. So it was a fail fast moment because I knew it was going to fail. I absolutely knew I was going into this thing and it was going to implode. So I'd set myself up for that to start off with. The change process for that started with asking that group of people, what do you want? Why do you turn up every day? So they became the voice that was coming in. So even as they were orchestrating this, I was still sitting there going, I don't think you actually really get why we need to do this change. I'm not on board with actually what you're saying. It's your lived experience, but I can see there's this gap between where you are now and where you're going to need to be in a couple of years' time from now. And it was skills, it was workplace, it was understanding the future of work. It was so different. So I had this one whole system set up. The very first day I had almost 500 calls to our separate help desk because I didn't know how to turn the device on. So that, right, great learning. Didn't even think about that one. Great learning. But one very critical moment, I was standing in an external forum and a particular person walked up to me. It was a visceral moment. I thought I was going to be slapped with this laptop. I really did. It was the reaction was physical from this person because the fear factor had taken hold. They were one of the people that didn't know how to turn it on. And I sat back and I said, after this kind of finger pointing, you've done this to me. I went, actually, what have I done to you? I've made you feel uncomfortable. Tell me why you're uncomfortable. So I created a safe space that allowed that person to share their experience, no judgment. And I just said, well, how can we help reshape that? I said, who does your tech at home? That person explained who did the tech at home, which wasn't them. And I said, okay, so maybe it's not actually what I'm forcing you to do here. It's actually more about the journey that's happening outside of this workplace that you feel like you're being left behind. So maybe we do something a little bit different in here. That person went from the one that I thought I was going to be slapped by the laptop and actually had no idea about working in this particular new environment to being the digital training lead for that program 2 years later. So it was quite a journey. Similar one in cyber, actually. Some of the things we do in cybersecurity is about allowing people to run with scissors. So it's putting enough protection in place that they can run the risk. And you know that if they fall, they might nick themselves a little bit. They're not going to really harm themselves with these scissors. And so I had this one particular, just like a naming convention which had been put in place to help identify certain things. this one particular very vocal person said, that's ridiculous. We can't have that. Makes all of our communications look horrendous. So I stepped back and said, come with me along to one of my briefings and then let's talk about this. And so I brought them inside to understand why this was necessary. When they went back out, they actually did a cyber session in their masters like 3 years later. They became like, they went, oh, I get this now. Okay, you've shown me why this is necessary.
Yeah.
You can't do that for everybody, but the most loudest ones are going to be your greatest advocate for change if you can really understand why they've reacted like they have, why they're fearful of the change. It's not actually the ones that get on board with the change that are going to be your biggest advocates.
Yeah, interesting. A lot of people, the word crisis sends them into panic. I think you're someone, crisis, you operate very well in a crisis. Why? Why is that?
I think it's that calmness that we spoke about. So I am very pragmatic in how I approach things. So being able to look forward and then come back really helps me create that forward view. And then what do I need to start people doing now to get ready for that? So, you know, the last big crisis that we all had to go through took a lot of people by surprise. In my situation, I'd written the business continuity plan for that exact crisis. And so I kind of had a sense of this could happen one day. It had happened before, just not in our lifetimes. So how would we respond to something like that if we couldn't do our normal day-to-day? So that digital initiative with that workforce happened in 2018. By late 2019, they were completely untethered. So I brought calmness up front to something that may or may not happen, but I was preparing people with the right skills, being ready for any kind of situation. And it's really this risk-based approach to what could come and applying a pragmatic learning experience back here that helps calm that water. So for me, it's not about never let a crisis. That saying, you know, no, don't waste a good crisis or something.
Yeah.
It's well before the crisis. It's actually setting people up to have elasticity and resilience before the crisis happens, which allows you to get through. And that's the calm that I've been able to bring. I put my entire team through elasticity and resilience training 2 years before they actually had to lead us through the COVID response. I put the entire organisation through digital untethered experience and what it would be like to work in different ways, 2018 and 2019, before they then had to all work from home in 2020. So you kind of create this stability through this calm. So when the crisis hits, the calmness is just there because it's just a natural kind of, no, you've got this. You know how to do this. You know how to do this. You've done this before. So let's just put all that in place and we'll just continue to work through it.
Interesting. What's the, I think the biggest learning you've had, I think you talk around calmness and pragmatic approach to crisis, but there's always going to be a level of panic, particularly if you look at organizations that have been targeted with cyber attacks and the impact that has, and a lot of that panic comes from the board.
Yeah.
How do you remain calm and then the people around you to get them to a level of calmness so you can actually approach the problem in a pragmatic way?
So if we take that as like an example, being practiced at those first 10 chess moves is incredibly important. So really knowing what role do I play if this scenario happens and how does that fit in with the next one? So those first 10 chess moves should be just muscle memory and you're just doing it because then that allows you to get in front of the next 10 chess moves that you may not know what they look like just yet because you don't know what that threat could potentially look like or how that will play out in, you know, tech terms in that particular vector. So it requires some level of practice muscle memory in that first instance and practice and bringing the teams together to say, okay, if this scenario happened, here's our first 10 moves, then I know that's covered. I can start thinking about what comes next, which is often, okay, I know this is happening. Now I can talk to the board in a very calm way. Yeah. I can talk to the executive team in a very calm way because that first part's already happening.
Yep. Okay. And crisis is a word that people are fearful of. So is stress and also pressure as well. But again, stress and pressure is something that you see as a positive thing in the right way. Yeah. Talk the listeners through your thoughts around stress and pressure.
Yeah. So this resilience training that I spoke about prior really gave me good insight into an equation which seems to measure well, really. So stress plus rest equals growth. So it's like going to the gym and tearing a muscle and then feeding the protein to ensure that mends and
Yep.
grows. So when you apply good stress, it's stretching you really. And if it tears a little, that's great. You're uncomfortable, it's going to tear. But then allow yourself that moment of rest and recovery to then repair what's taken place. And then, of course, you're going to grow as an outcome of that. Where it goes incredibly wrong is where it's bad stress. And so I can't caveat it strong enough. It has to be good stress. So when you get bad stress at the front end of that equation, it undermines your self-worth. It creates an instability in your psychological safety. You will notice it from physical attributes in your body. You need to run from that as quick as possible, because the longer you stay in that negative stress, it will erode everything that you've worked so hard to get. And no environment, person, leader is worth taking that away from you. That's yours to own. So that, for me, it was always be very clear about the good stress, have the right rest, and you will grow. We used to have this game we'd play, which was a 100-point score. And 100 points was the amount of rest you would need on an average week. And this was actually done by a sports scientist in the recovery of super athletes. Clearly, I'm not one of them. However, if you say I'm a corporate athlete, then we applied this particular process. So we went, okay, here's our stress plus our rest and growth. So normal stress week, good stress. We need 100 points of recovery. And then it would list outdoor activities and indoor activities that would contribute to 100 points. And we gamified it. So every Monday I would go, I only made 95 this week. I need to make up an extra 5 next week. So keep putting it in the bank. Worked really well, because we were then holding each other accountable to creating this rest cycle in our good stress week. Where it changes, the more stress and pressure. So just think about, the last crisis we went through, a lot of stress. And I will say it wasn't bad stress, because the preparation was calmative in how that came. But in myself, that week where we all made certain changes in society to work from home and we had different directives, I had my confirmation of candidate for my doctorate. I had stood up in front to lead the response and be in front of visibly a couple of thousand people to say, this is how you're going to work. Declare martial law on what they could do, with the CEOs kind of wrapping around me saying, this is it. Get ready for my confirmation of candidate, which went from literally a in-person to a virtual, and then run out the rest of the week stabilising as people got comfortable when they took their monitors and their chairs from work. So I curled up in the fetal position on that Saturday and bawled my eyes out, because I hadn't given myself any rest. I was running that whole entire time, and I was doing my normal routine, getting my 8 hours sleep, context switching, doing the usual things I would do. But that pressure cooker that I had created in that week, I hadn't recognised until the end of the week that I actually needed double the amount of rest and double the amount of recovery. So it was a really good lesson to go into the following week and talk about, this happened to me, because the organisation knew how much I held firm stress and recovery and how much I knew that was so important. And here I was, as someone who was practicing that constantly, and I had got it wrong in that week. And so it was important for me to stand up in front of everybody and say, this actually happened to me. I'm going to share this lesson because you need to be really well aware of it. And at that point, that's when we went, we need to make sure we dial up. If the stress dials up, we need to dial up our rest and recovery as well. So
I think like stress and pressure is what we put on ourselves. But I think stress and pressure can also come from external sources, like particularly in a work environment. So I think if it's getting to the point where stress and pressure from external sources are getting too much, what advice would you give to listeners around approaching in the right way, how to deal with that?
So recognizing it in yourself, I think, is the first step. We're so easy, like, people on the whole are a yes, like, very difficult for most people to say no. I learned to say no so well that one of my leaders said, I think you've learnt it well enough now. Time to start saying yes. Okay. So I think lesson one, like, you actually do need to recognize that you're in stress. And sometimes, as I said before, it is actually the small things. It could be your family telling you, friends telling you. It could be simple things that they're saying, we haven't seen much of you lately because, you seem to be working all the time. It's eating into your weekends. So you start to pick up on all these little things from external places. So I think the challenge, recognize it yourself. And then I would hope that you have a safe enough work environment that you can have that discussion with your direct leader. I can't think of a situation outside of that first instance where I've been in an environment where I didn't feel I could have an open, transparent conversation with my direct leader, even to this day, like just very comfortable having conversations like that. So I think that's me facilitating a level of trust immediately, and at the same time that leader accepting that. So even before the right to switch off became legislative, that was something that was being practiced in every environment that I was in. And I think it takes us owning it as a person in that external pressure to actually then speak up and say, hey, I need help, I need some time out. And then that allows the entire team, or at least that leader, to lean in and go, okay, this is how we can make this work better for you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I think as we near the end of this episode, I think what's important to you is, I think rest is important to you, the flow in different stages of your, I suppose, work and personal life. Children are important to you. What else do you do to unwind and relax to make sure you get that right amount of rest before you start the next day?
Yeah. So obviously, clearly, the 8-hour sleep is critically important to me.
Yep.
But I am a big advocate for that leadership learning that I do. It's actually, I enjoy it. It's my downtime. So I think I had this nickname, and it still comes with, so there's two that my family say, Dr. Phil and Joy. So Joy is a character out of a Disney cartoon. So that seems to be my icon. So everywhere I go, that's there. So I approach things with a level of energy and optimism. That's natural. So that helps, right, in the recharge process. So you have good perspective and you approach with energy and optimism. The actual Dr. Phil moment is actually being able to talk about some pretty tough conversations in a way that you can engage properly. So things happen during the day. Being able to talk about it with good friends and family or trusted colleagues is a really important way of sharing the load. So it's a recovery mechanism. So for me, I pick up so much during the day. I read so much. I love knowledge. In myself, I love to share that. So whether it's I share it on LinkedIn, I share it through, forums like this, or I attend and mentor a lot of people, I also share it with my family. And so that's really cathartic for me and really actually helps me unwind at the end of the day. Might wind them up at the end of the day, but it winds me down.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to today's episode, and thank you, Angela, for being part of it. Today's episode, we covered her background and her journey and the zigzag approach and curiosity that led her to where she is today. We talked around the value of stress and pressure in a good way and how you can apply that to your career and make sure you're pushing yourself to where you want to be going. We also talked around crisis and also diversity and the value of driving diversity and being part of that change as well. So as we bring to a close, I'd like to offer, as I do always, the opportunity for Angela to give the one bit of advice that you wish you had given yourself early in your career that the listeners may benefit from.
That my kindness, my courage is my superpower, and to actually embrace it as a positive. Don't let people say that it was a negative.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Please like, share, comment, and stay tuned for more episodes. Thank you very much.